One thing I'd like to talk about with regard to that is, that issue of trying to integrate children into regular education programs. One of the difficulties that I see is, of course, everybody wants their kid to make it into regular education. They want them to be just like all the other kids, riding their bicycles in the cul-de-sac with the other kids in the neighborhood, being just like the other kids in the neighborhood. And so do I. So do I. The problem, though, is that sometimes people grab some pieces of information about the child's performance and they take that to indicate that this child is ready to be like the other children and learn like the other children. For example, many times children will be taught to identify words and letters and numbers and count, and they look like they've got the basic academics. And if a child likes that, that's fine. There's no reason not to do that. However, by teaching these basic academics, which are fairly simplistic in many ways when you stop to think about it, just having those skills doesn't mean that they're ready for first grade, because they can count and they can read some words, they can maybe even give some sounds of letters, sound out some words. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to sit in a classroom with a child in first grade and be able to learn like those first graders. Many times these children still are lacking many basic language skills, especially what we call the introverbals. That's basically talking about things in their absence, if you will. You say something and I say something related to it. So you say, oh, tell me some sports, and I say, oh, there's baseball and there's hockey. I might be able to answer some questions, if you will, talk about topics, name some animals, or let's talk about some things you might do after school. We might be able to talk about things like that, or describe things. Can you describe a bicycle to me? Well, some of the children with autism may be able to label items, they may be able to ask for items, they may be able to receptively identify items, but if they can't talk about items in their absence, then you're going to have some problems, because once you get into education, yes, the first year might be some simple academics, some counting, some numbers, following simple directions, but soon it gets into very, very complex language-based activities. You're talking about science issues, you're talking about social studies types of issues, you're talking about, the weather, you're talking about who settled in North America, where did they come from and what did they trade. Well, if you've got an individual who can't pay attention to and respond to language like that, they're going to be lost. And even though they may have some academic skills that look like they're on par with the other children, if their language skills haven't been adequately addressed, they're going to be in trouble. And that's where you'll find a lot of children can get into kindergarten or first grade, but they're still not learning in group instruction. They're still not talking about things in their absence very well. They're not talking about what they've done, who they saw, where they were, what they did on different days. And so now you get them into a classroom and they look like they're doing all right for maybe kindergarten, first grade, but second grade, third grade, all of a sudden people start realizing they're not keeping up. And then it's, what do we do now? So you're right, it's not just a matter of being there with other kids. It's not through osmosis they're going to get this. This is because they've learned some critical learner skills that really allow them to learn from their everyday interactions with others. And so that's the whole idea behind the ABLES, is to try to take a look and define, show what those skills might be. Again, not that anything's perfect, but it certainly seems to be a good way of at least gauging at this point in time how we go forward with children. I have another scenario I'd like to describe to you, and that is, you'd walk into a classroom and here's a teacher, and what do they do with children in special education? Well, they've got to have their morning circle time. And so now you come in, and I'm called in as a consultant to help out with a little boy, and the problem is he won't stay seated during the morning circle time. He gets up and he keeps leaving. So they've hired another instructional assistant to sit behind him and say, "Attaboy, Johnny, you're sitting there very nicely," reinforce him with praise to try to keep him there. And then I'd come in, because it wasn't working, I'd come in and I'd start watching. They're talking about the weather, they're talking about the days of the week and who arrived and what they were going to do after lunch. And then I'd start asking some questions about the boy. Let's just call him Johnny, okay? So Johnny's got a problem. He's jumping up and down, and the therapist, the instructional assistant would wait for him, praise him, and as soon as he'd jump up, they'd grab him, bring him back down. And then he'd grab him, bring him back down. Or maybe reach out and pull Susie's hair, get the hands back. And attaboy, Johnny, you're sitting there nicely. And then I start asking, well, what language skills does Johnny have? And it turns out that Johnny couldn't even perhaps label even his backpack or his shoes or know what a school bus is, let alone what the temperature is like and what you're going to do after lunch. So you've got a child who's sitting there in a situation for 15, 20 minutes when there's really no way for him to learn or participate in that. He has no way of gaining access to reinforcers. So he does what we would do. If we were put in a class where we didn't have the slightest idea what was going on, we'd probably better leave. Go do something else. And so basically what happened in those situations was I started saying, well, you're addressing the wrong problem. What Johnny needs is to learn language skills such that he can access reinforcers, rather than sit there and try to learn something that's impossible for him to learn under these conditions. So anyhow, that being the case, I saw enough of this going on, and I tried to make changes as a consultant from outside, and I realized it was hopeless. It wasn't going to happen.
For more information on integration and behavior modification, visit partingtonbehavioranalyst.com.